Good evening, everyone, and welcome to session 2 of the Writing for Publication. Today, we're going to continue where we left off yesterday. I'll just do a brief recap, just hopefully for those who could not be with us today so that they quickly catch up. But also just to remind ourselves as well, those who attended yesterday. So I won't do much on that because we have quite a lot to go through. So I want to actually continue with the content for session 2 instead. Once again, my name is Professor Puleng Sakgalo, and I'm delighted to be facilitating this session for you tonight. Okay. All right, so as I said, we're continuing with writing for publication. Today we're looking at, okay, apologies. So today we're looking at session 2. This is where we are. All right. So how do we select the right journal? Yesterday, we spoke about the importance of understanding how the journals work. We spoke about the importance of understanding the focus of your work, the audience that you want to communicate with through the article that you're going to be writing, and how that is interconnected with the journal that you're going to choose for your work. And I also spoke about the different steps that an article normally goes through when it gets to a journal. And one of those is that it gets to the editor. And one of the things that may happen is that your article can get desk rejected, right? And this is something that you really need to avoid as much as possible, because often the desk rejection are based on you submitting an article to a journal that is not necessarily in line with the work that you're doing, or your work is not in line with the scope of the journal that you've submitted to, right? And so if your work does not fulfill the requirements of the journal, the editor immediately rejects your work, right? If you get editors that maybe might be kinder, which is very rare in terms of the time that it takes for one to go through many articles that gets onto the editor's desk. The editor may decide to send it back and say, pay attention to these things and then send it back. But often it gets desk rejected. So try as much as possible to ensure that by the time you submit your article, it's ready and that it will be considered by the journal. Okay, so identify a number of journals that you might want to send your article to. You have your top journal, that this is the journal that I would like to send my work to. Why is it that you want to send it to that journal? And what is maybe the second option that you may have? What is the third option that you may have? Also be realistic as well. Yesterday we spoke about journals in different databases and journals that are ranked differently in terms of impact factors as well. So as a novice researcher, as a researcher still at the initial stages of your scholarly career, you may want to send your article to a journal that's got a good enough impact factor, so maybe a 3, a 5, but not necessarily a 20, because chances are, though your article will be desk rejected, right? Those journals receive hundreds and thousands of articles all the time. And there it's you against many other established researchers. This is not to say your work may not necessarily be good enough for that journal, but it's also trying to pace yourself and being realistic in terms of where you are, in terms of your scholarship and what you're contributing and how you're approaching your work and the chances of your work therefore being published in that particular journal. all the time, make sure that you follow the author guidelines. So here we're talking about the scope of the journal. So what kind of articles, what kind of papers does this journal publish? The word length, and this is very important. Journals have different requirements when it comes to word length. Some journals will say 4,000 words. Some journals will say 6,000 words. Some journals will be generous and say 10,000 words. So make sure that you stick to the word limit of the journal that you have chosen. If the journal that you've chosen says the word limit is 5,000 words and you submit an article that is 8,500 words, that can lead to desk rejection. It immediately tells the editor that this person did not read the guidelines and this person did not do work that is succinct enough in the way that we want our work to be in this journal. The different journals, it's because of funding, for example, because remember, you pay for each and every page, or the journal pays for each and every page, right? So if you submit a lengthy article, they will not consider it. And sometimes it's also a sign to them that you are not able to say what it is that you need to say in a few words. So chances are you went on and on unnecessarily in the paper that you've written. Already, it's a bad sign. It's a negative sign if you exceed the word length. So try as much as possible to stick to the word length of the journal that you've chosen. And of course, the referencing style, I've spoken about this. If they say Harvard style, make sure that you write your article in Harvard style. If it's Chicago, make sure that you write your paper in Chicago referencing style. Where do you send your paper? There are different ways in which journals accept papers or submissions. So some accept the paper sent directly to the editor. So when you go online or when you check the details of the journal, you'll find that the editor's details are there, their email address is there, and they will let you know how to then send that paper. But other journals, most journals actually these days have an online submission. So you would need to create an account online. And then after creating that account, there are quite a number of steps that you need to follow in submitting of your paper. Some would require a cover letter, and some would require additional, if you have additional images or other additional content that is not part of the overall paper, but that you think is important for the editor and reviewers to have a look at and to engage with, for them to get a better understanding of the work that you've done, you can also do that as well. So these are called supplementary materials. So what supplementary materials are they as well? That some would at the end be included as part of the paper, some would not. So for example, images. So some journals would say, if you have images in the paper, just write insert image 1 here, insert, so you don't insert the images in the article itself. Okay, so check the author guidelines, check what it is that is required in terms of submission, and follow the directions in terms of their preferred submission. Sometimes the editor email address would be there, but then the submission for your article has to be done online. So don't send your article to the editor just because the editor's email address is there. Read and see what their submission procedures are and follow those procedures. The editor's email address could be there for you to maybe write an email and ask whatever questions that you may have, and follow up as well. Sometimes if you need to follow up, if you've submitted and it's now been 6 months, you haven't heard back from them, you are within your right to follow up and just find out, and then they can let you know what the issue could be in terms of your paper not having received feedback yet. Okay, and as I said, with the email, sometimes you might want to, especially if you are still at the beginning stages of your research career, your scholarship, you may want to just send an abstract to the editor and say, this is my abstract. This is what I'm working on. Do you think this is suitable? Would your journal consider a paper that is focusing on this, that's about this? And then the editor can then tell you, yes, this is in line with what we're looking for. Please go ahead and submit your paper. And please don't despair if you don't receive an answer. Sometimes editors are very, very busy. So sometimes you may send that abstract and then not receive feedback in the time that you're hoping to. So either send the abstract or you can send an outline and say just the summary of what it is that you want to focus on. And then say, would you please look at this? But it doesn't have to be the editor. It's good if it's the editor and they're accessible and they can respond. But of course, you have your supervisor as well. So as you are starting to think about the possible articles that you're going to be writing, have a conversation with the supervisor, write an abstract and say, okay, I'm thinking of an article that has this kind of focus. Here's the abstract. Do you think this makes sense? Can I then continue writing the paper on this? And then your supervisor can then advise you accordingly. And of course, if you have identified a journal, get to know that journal. Get to know that journal. And one of the ways of getting to know that journal is to read some of the papers that have been published by that journal. And like I said yesterday, the library has got access to all these journals, so it should not be a problem for you to get access to it. So when you submit your article online, often what is required is that you must include a cover letter. Please use this opportunity of the cover letter to quote unquote sell your paper, right? So why should the journal consider your paper? So this is a letter that the editor is going to read. So make sure that as you draft that letter, it's in such a way that the editor will be able to understand what your work is about and what contribution your work is providing. So some of the things that you would not necessarily state in the way of selling your paper in the article itself. So use the cover letter to do that. And the cover letter is there to introduce yourself and your co-authors, because as you submit your paper, remember, you don't include your name, your personal details in the paper, because the paper is going to be sent out for blind peer review. So you should make sure that your article does not have any identifying markers in the paper. So for example, if you've published before, and this is a follow-up on work that you've done, and in the paper you are quoting yourself. So as you do this, it should be done in such a way that I, as the reviewer, would be able to see immediately that, oh, this is so-and-so's paper or so-and-so's work. So as you do that, you need to try as much as possible to make sure that identifiers are removed. In that way, then we can ensure blind peer review. Okay. So here's just an example of a cover letter that you as the author can send to a journal. You'll see there, dear Dr. James Brower, who's the editor. My name is so-and-so. I'm submitting this paper on this issue on behalf of myself and my co-authors. It is our belief that the work we've done will serve as a valuable reference for other researchers in the urban ecology discipline. Right, and then it says a little bit about what the work is about, when it started, what it focuses on, right? And then it says this particular article then is based on that work, and then this is what the work was about. And then it says specifically, we researched the potential impacts of urban restoration or greening projects in our air quality. As our research builds upon several articles previously published in the Modern Ecology Journal. So that line already says to the editor, I'm aware of your journal. I know the kind of work that you publish, and I've read work, so I'm familiar with the kind of work that you publish. So our work is in line with the kind of work that you publish, but also our work is also then going to be in conversation and build on and add on the work that you've already considered as a journal. We believe it will be relevant to your readers. Further, it reaches both new conclusions and introduces new questions for future research use. Already there, you're telling the editor what it is that your work is bringing in. So in that way, it's actually adding on the work that already exists, and it adds in these particular ways. All right, so this is an example of a cover letter and how you can consider writing your own cover letter when you're writing your article and submitting it to a journal. Right. So how do you identify a potential home for your paper? Because when we reference your work, when we find your work, it's always going to be linked to that journal. So it will be Hello 2020 and the name of the article and then journal of so and so. So that journal will always be linked to you. That paper will be linked to that journal, which will then be linked to you. So how do you then identify a potential home? Yesterday we spoke about the accreditation list that DHET has, which is linked to subsidies that universities in South Africa get when students and academics publish their academic work, right? So the list with publication date of 2016 onwards is there because there's always, every 5 years, there's always a review of the journals that are accredited. So when a journal is accredited, please note that it is not a lifetime accreditation, because sometimes the standards do drop along the way, unfortunately. Sometimes there are issues and challenges along the way, maybe with editorship. So the journals do get reviewed as well. And sometimes you may find that a journal gets reviewed and then it gets de-accredited. Okay, so that can happen. So that's why the DHET list is always updated. When you get the list, you have to make sure that it is an updated list. So you can get hold of the DHET list from 2017 or from 2014, but you will note that that list is not the same as the list for 2022. So that's why it's always important to make sure that as you look for a potential journal, you use the most recent updated list. So each and every year there's a list. So there's a 2022 DHET list, which you should use as you go about looking for a journal that you're going to publish your work in. Okay, and then there are different indexes and databases that are used and that are accredited. And as they are accredited, then they form part of the DHET list. And if they form part of the DHET list, then the journals that fall under those indexes and databases are the journals that you can consider. So some of them fall under the ISI, which is the International Scientific Indexing. It's one of the highly rated indexing space for journals. So most of the journals that are published in ISI would be highly regarded. Yes, they would be highly regarded. And then IBSS as well, the International Journal of the Social Sciences, and IBSS also is a database space. So you can choose a journal that is under IBSS. So when you Google and you look for journals, and then in your particular field or your particular discipline, some of this information is there. So when you look and you check, you will see that it will say it's a Scopus journal, it's IBSS, it's ISI. So now you will know what that means in terms of the quality of the work, the impact of the work, and that it is a journal that is accredited as well. It's deemed as being credible and producing quality work that has been blind peer reviewed. And then we also have the South Africa Department of Higher Education list, including many of our local journals as well. And note that some of the journals are actually double indexed. So a journal can be on the DHET list, but also be IBSS as well. So it can be indexed in multiple platforms. And then Scopus as well, using abstract and citation database. And it was established by Elsevier. Elsevier is a publisher that put together publishing in terms of books, but also a long list of journals as well. And if you publish with a journal that is under Elsevier and it's under Scopus, then you know that it's deemed as being credible and accredited. And the same with Cielo SA, Scientific Electronic Library Online. It's also part of, or it's linked to ASAF, the Academy of Sciences of South Africa. So that's again the Scientific Library Online with a list of journals. And then we have the Norwegian list. Also, this is from Norway. It's part of the Norwegian Register for Scientific Journals and series and books. So again, here South Africa just said, because of the processes, the stringent ways in which they made sure that they look at the quality of the journals that are published under the Norwegian list, then DHET also said, all the journals that are under the Norwegian list, we will also consider and accredit and subsidize under the DHET list. So when you look at the DHET list, you will see that all the hundreds and hundreds of journals that are there are listed under each of these different indexes. So then you'll see what your particular journal that you're considering falls under. Okay, and then that's how you can look at the potential journal that you can choose for yourself. So how do you decide on which journal to use? Again, here it's just a summary of what I've already said. So what is the journal's purpose? What is its aim? What is its readership? So who are they focusing on in terms of the work that they are publishing? So what is the focus and the scope of the journal? And how prestigious is it? So where is it indexed? And also, what is the impact factor of that journal? Is that something that's important to you? So if that's something that's very important to you, so that's also a marker, that's something that you will use to decide on whether to publish in that particular journal or not. And also, you may choose a journal based on how many issues they have per year. Remember, we said some journals have got 2 issues, some have got 3, some have got 4 issues. So you might say, okay, in terms of increasing my chances of getting published, maybe I'll choose a journal that has got 4 issues a year, because I know that even if maybe by the time I submit in March, there's still maybe 3 other issues that my work can be considered for. If I choose a journal that only has 2 issues a year, chances are if I don't make it for one of the issues, then my work will be queued, because that's what journals do. They'll be queued for next year. I've had papers where I've been informed that your paper has been accepted, and please note that it's going to be published in June 2023. You know, so it can be accepted now, but it will only come out in June 2023. And that's again because of the number of articles that they already have, the number of articles that they've already accepted before mine, and also the number of articles that they can accommodate per issue. So some journals can publish maybe 7 or 8 journals, 8 articles in an issue. And if they've got 2 issues per year, that means only 12 articles. If maybe it's 6 articles per issue, then that's only 12 articles per year. And they've received 9,000 submissions. So do you see also how that works in terms of you really deciding and getting to know the journal and understanding the waiting period that is possible for you when you've chosen the journal? Is it national? Is it international? Again, we spoke about how this again will be determined by your audience, the focus of the paper that you're writing. So do not just decide that, no, I want international recognition, I want international journal, and so I'm going to publish my work in an international journal. Is your paper meant for an international audience in that sense, in terms of the focus, in terms of what it's looking at, right? So that's also very important to understand your audience, to understand your focus before you decide on whether you're going to go for a national or an international journal. Is it refereed? and how is it refereed? This is an important index of quality as well, right? So is it refereed by the editor alone? So is the editor the only one who's going to be reading your work and then giving you feedback and saying, okay, we accept your paper or not? Is there an editorial board that maybe also plays a role and is active when it comes to the refereeing or reviewing of the paper? Is the paper going to be peer reviewed, right? So remember, there's peer reviewed and there's blind peer reviewed. So the peer reviewed, it can be reviewed by colleagues and you may know who the reviewers are. Sometimes some journals would say, please recommend reviewers for your paper. You know people in your field, give us 3 names. So even if they use only 2 names, but you know that it's the 2 of the 3, so it's not blind in that sense. And then there's blind peer reviewed, which is what is often required for the accredited journals. So blind peer reviewed is that it's sent out to reviewers whom you'll never get to know and get to find out who it is that refereed or reviewed your paper. So again, this information is there. When you go online, when you look at the journal, the information would be there, or it should be there if it's a legit journal. So they'll say the Journal of Health Sciences is a peer-reviewed journal with an editorial board, this and that and the other. So what is there that they're providing you that you can use as a marker for the quality that is required, but also that you can use for you to determine whether that will be a good fit for your work or not. Okay, and here's just an example again in terms of the author guidelines. So often when you go online and you look at a journal, you would see something like this. So it would be something that looks like this. So each and every journal has got its own author guidelines. Make sure that you understand the author guidelines for that specific journal that you would have chosen, right? So this one, for example, the Journal of Mental Health Training, Education, and Practice. So that's what the journal is. And what it does is it highlights the critical workforce issues in mental health services in terms of the training around mental health, education, and also the practice of it. So already when you look at that, when you read that, you need to then ask yourself, is my work in line with what they say their journal is about? Right, so it requires evidence-based work, focusing on workforce, on development, on education, and on training. Right, and then it's got national and international features and highlights service user involvement. So, and then it says peer-reviewed submissions will be considered in the following areas. And then it goes on to be very specific in terms of the kind of papers and submissions that they would consider. So when you look at your own submission, your article against these 4 bullets that are here, is your work fitting into one of these bullets? Is it a report of original research that you want to submit? Is it a work that focuses on description on important innovations? Is your work in any way talking about some innovation in terms of training techniques or practices that people can use, so innovative ways in which we can think about training around mental health, right? Is it a work that's focusing on summaries of useful information on relevant and topical issues in workforce development, more specifically, and overviews of research which aims to present the practical implications for workforce in development in mental health services? So you use that as your guide, and then you say, here's my work, here's my research, here's my paper. Is my work falling anywhere in what this journal is looking for? And if your answer is yes, and you can see specifically how your work fits in, then you can consider sending your paper there. And if not, then you know that this is not the journal for you. Chances are maybe your work is going to be rejected, right? And for this particular journal, you'll see there says papers should be submitted by email and in MS Word. So you're not going to send a PDF if they said MS Word, because there's a reason why they want it in MS Word. and then the email addresses are there, and then you send it by email. So some would say go online and then submit in this particular way. So this is just one example of what the opening page or the home page of a journal would look like. And then for you to go and familiarize yourself with it, and then go and look at another journal and go and look at another journal and say which one is best suited for me. Okay. All right, and then developing the manuscript now. So we've spoken about how to choose your journal, thinking about what makes an article acceptable or not acceptable. So the admin of it that we've just done. So now we're going to zoom in into the actual developing of your manuscript and developing a manuscript that has got high chances of being accepted by the journal, right? Remember, it's a subjective process. You're going to get reviewers who are going to look at your work from their own point of view, from their own perspective, and your work might be in line with their way of thinking or doing, and they might appreciate the work that you're doing, but sometimes not necessarily, right? So when editors choose reviewers, they try as much as possible to look at people whose work is in line with the submission that they've received. So let's talk a little bit then on how to develop your manuscript and walking through your paper. And you'll see the parallels here when it comes to the broader work that you're doing in your thesis and your dissertation. And hopefully some of these elements can feed back into the research that you're currently busy with as well, and not only just zooming in on the article, even though we're specifically talking about the article. So some of the things you'll see, it's some of the work that you've already covered in the previous sessions earlier, and now coming back to how do you put all of those again into an article that you can submit? How do you move from the 200-page thesis or dissertation to the 10, 15 page, 5,000 word document that will make sense? So just a quick recap again. Why do we publish? We publish because we want to increase human knowledge, right? We publish because it's, again, a form of self-actualization. So you do the work and then you write about it, you reflect on it, you interpret, and you communicate the work that you're doing. So as a scholar, as a researcher, as someone maybe doing your master's or PhD, wanting to contribute towards knowledge production, this is also a process of part of the process of self-actualization for yourself as someone in this field and in this space. Okay. And then, of course, we publish because it's one of the ways to show that we've completed something. And this is part of the dissemination of that which you have completed. You've done the research, you've done the work, you've contemplated on something, and now you want to share that with your peers as a way of opening up communication, as a way of opening up conversation and interrogation in some sense of the work that you've done. And then you've come up with something worth sharing. Why are you doing this master's degree? Why are you doing this PhD? It's so that you can come up with a renewed understanding, is so that you can close certain gaps that exist, is so that you can come up with new, innovative, creative ways in which we look at a particular phenomena, so that you respond to some societal issue that has been maybe itching you, that you feel you want to do something about. And so you publish so that you can promote that work. You want to share it with people. And of course, as I always say, it's also about the joys of seeing your name in print. It's your name in print, but it's also so that tomorrow we can also quote you and reference you as well. Those who are going to be doing their master's and PhD tomorrow, they'll be drawing from the work that you've produced, and they can only do that if you put your work out there. Okay, so the overview of a manuscript, right? The format of a typical manuscript. In many of the journals actually mimic, if you will, they mimic the style that you would use in your dissertation or your thesis, where you will have the introduction, the background of the issue that you've investigated, that you want to speak to your audience about, and why it's important, right? The significance of this work, this area. And this is where, you know, your argument comes in, your thesis statement, the purpose. What is this about? What is it that you were contemplating on, and what is it that you did? What is it that you went about doing? And then you're going to explain to us later how you then did that. And then you say, this is based on the literature that exists speaks to this, and this is how I'm entering that conversation. And then you go on to then say the methodologies that you've used, qualitative, quantitative, drawing on this. This is what you've done, and this is how you've analyzed. So it's reporting on that work that you've done, right? So hence I say it's like taking the structure of your dissertation or thesis and then writing about that original research in a way that conveys the message, but in a way that's not going to have a literature review that's 20 pages long or 5 pages long. So here you need to be very deliberate in terms of what literature you choose to include and how including that literature is going to assist you to put forward the claim or the argument that you are coming with in this paper. Right, so the analysis, the findings, the discussion, the limitations, how do we move forward? What recommendations are you giving us? And then the conclusions, what is it that you're leaving us with? What questions do you leave with us? What possibilities do you leave with us when it comes to this issue? And then, of course, references. You need to provide the references also. And if you draw a lot from literature, that's going to eat up a lot of your space, because then you're going to have a reference section that's got 3 or 4 pages because you've drawn so much from literature. Now there's this reference list that's 7 pages in a paper that's 15 pages. Think about it. If your article is 15 pages, does it make sense to have 7 pages as references? Already, that means you used up space unproductively, but also I'm going to wonder as a reviewer whether your voice is audible enough in that paper if you're going to be drawing so much from other people. And as I say here, also remember the word limit. Remember the word limit because you want to maximize the number of words that have been afforded to you. If a journal says maximum words 5,000, make sure that you maximize that. What is it that you want the reader to take with from this paper? What is it that you want the reader to draw from the work that you're bringing in? So with the word limit in mind, make sure that you become very creative in how you do your work. So obviously you're not going to give us a background for 4 pages. You're not going to give us a long background. We're interested in you saying this is the brief background, this is what this is about, and this is why I think it's important. And this is the argument that I'm coming into this conversation with. Some people have engaged with similar work, and this is what they said, and this is what they said. And this is how I'm entering the conversation. While there's all this work that's been done, this has not been done enough, or this is missing. And therefore, I'm embarking, or I've embarked on this quantitative study to try and measure this, which has not been measured before or measured differently before. And this is how I went about doing this. I did correlations, or I did whatever. And then I analyzed the data, and this is what I found. So most of the bulk of your work would be there in your data, engaging with the data and the findings and the discussion. So what is it that you want your reader to take from this, the discussion? And then say, based on this discussion, this is what I'm suggesting as a way forward. These are the recommendations that I'm putting forward, which I think would be useful in terms of how we can rethink mental health practices and training, for example, right? So use your words very wisely. And that's why there's word limit, because it forces you to stick to what it is that you want the reader to know about without going on and on and on and on. Okay, so in terms of the abstract, as we said, it's a very important aspect of your work. Again, when you submit your article, you will see on the journals, they would actually want you to submit your abstract separately, and then the body of the work separately, and then your personal details also separately as well. The abstract is very important because the abstract gives the reader an immediate overview of what the work is about. The abstract is the first thing that is going to tell me as the reader whether I should read your whole paper or not. So how you structure, how you frame, how you put together your abstract is very important. Think of your abstract as a selling point. This is how you sell your paper, right? This is how you sell the article and say, please read my article. That's all in the abstract. The abstract should make me want to read your paper. And remember, you only have 100 to 300 words, again, depending on the journal, right? So if the journal has a word limit and they say 5,000 words or 7,000 words, they also specify very explicitly that the abstract should be 200 words. Or they would say a maximum of 200 words, which means it can be 100 words, it can be 135 words, but you must not exceed 200 words. And the structure of it as well, be precise. If you only have 100 words to summarize the work that you've done, you really have to be precise. You have to be clear, and you also have to be very interesting. So how you choose what you include without using a lot of jargon, without trying to provide a lot of work that one can get in the actual paper, then you lose out. So make it interesting, make it clear. And here some examples: avoid generic statements. Don't say the results will be discussed. So if, for example, the journal that you're publishing in is those journals, like many journals out there, unfortunately, a journal that one has to pay to get access to. And in your abstract, you say the results will be discussed. You say methods are presented. And then you go on and say future research is discussed. That is saying absolutely nothing to me. So if I have to pay $40 for me to get access to that journal and to your paper to read it, the abstract has to give me something that's going to make me be willing to pay $40 for me to be able to access your paper. And if you're just going to say, in this paper, the results will be discussed, then yeah, chances are people will not download your paper. And what that then ultimately does is that it's going to affect your citations, because if I can't access your paper, then it means I cannot cite your work. And if I cannot cite your work, then yeah, then your work is not having the kind of impact that you would want it to have. Okay. So when writing an abstract, imagine that it's all you'll have to say, right? I may decide that, okay, I'm not going to buy this paper, or I may not have access to that paper at that moment, but I should get an idea of what your work is about. So if the abstract is the putting together of everything that you've done in a way that makes sense to your reader, imagine it as something that if it was all that I had to say, if I were to be asked to stand in front of a room of people and I have to present my abstract, my work in an abstract format, and that's all that I'm given, would it make sense to people after I've shared my abstract with them? And this is for journals, but also sometimes when you go to conferences, they ask you to submit your abstract. And based on your abstract, they decide whether to invite you to come and present your paper or not. So if your abstract is not convincing enough, or if your abstract is not clear enough, then the conference organizers the reviewers of the conference might reject your submission and you will not be invited to go to that conference to present. Okay, so start a conversation with the readers. Start that conversation and invite them to a further discussion. And the further discussion would be what? It would be getting access to your paper and reading your paper further. Right. So think of the 4 C's when you're thinking about writing an abstract. It has to be complete on its own. So it's not methods will be discussed, future research will be discussed. So it has to be complete. It covers the major parts of the project. So you provide that overview. You give me an indication of how you went about doing your work, some aspects on what your work found, and then some information on what it found, right? And then if I want to then understand how you did it, and I want to understand the recommendations or the discussion, then I can get access to work. So it has to be complete on its own, right? And it has to be concise. Remember, we've got 100 words, we've got 200 words. It must be focused and provide clear information on your topic. And it must be readable. So write in a way that someone can read the work and understand where you're coming from, where you're going. And that can happen if your work is organized. And try as much as possible. I have said it in the previous sessions that sometimes it's not easy to avoid jargon depending on the field that you're in, but as much as possible, try and think of another way in which you can relay this message in a way that's understandable, right? So it should not be too jargon laden. So if there's particular phrases, words that are in your field that you must use, because that's the only way that you can be able to put across what you are saying, by all means do that. But it should not be jargon laden. And by that I mean it should not be from the beginning to the end. After I read your article, I sit there and I'm like, what? What are you saying? What exactly is this paper about? So I should not be asking myself that question after reading the abstract. You should write it in a way that answers me without you being there to explain it to me. Okay, and then of course the cohesiveness, I always say the flow is very, very important. It has to, again, move smoothly and swiftly between the different parts. Okay. And what you can do then to ensure that that happens is to use what we call the SPSE technique, which is the situation, describe the general background, the setting in which your research takes place. So what is the general background, a brief background of the work that you're doing or that you've done, and what is the problem that you are grappling with or you've grappled with, what is your work addressing? And then what is it that you did to address that problem that you've identified? How did you go about doing that? So what solution did you come up with? And then how did you evaluate that proposed solution and what were the results? So how did you analyze that? And then after analyzing, what is it that you've come up with and what is it that you want us to take with us? Okay. And then just quickly in thinking about how do I do that? How do I put that together? In thinking about, again, the word count and the word limits. So who are the intended readers? What is this work about? So think of, is it people in my field? Is it practitioners? Is it academics? So if you know who you are writing for, that will assist you in terms of how you frame and phrase the work that you're doing. Right. So who are the people that you're writing for? And then how did you go about doing the work that you did? So only 50 words, 50 words explaining what it is that you did. And you did this because it is, it was going to allow you to do 1, 2, and 3. So why did you do it that way? And then what happened? All right. So how did you then go about doing it? And then what do the results mean? So what is it that it's telling us, and how is this assisting us to think differently about this phenomena? So in terms of theory, how do you then come in, right? And then what do the results mean in practice? How can we apply this to respond to or to engage with that particular phenomena or issue or problem that you had identified, right? So if maybe there's also a practice identification to it. And there, again, only 50 words, right? Then for each, so talking a sentence or two, just 50 words. What is the key benefit for the readers? So this is important because it's going to assist us to do 1, 2, and 3, full stop, right? Is there anything that remains unresolved, or is what, so here you're thinking about future research questions that your work brings in for us to think about. So this is what this shows. But then it's also a call for us to continue thinking about considering finding ways to respond to this and to doing that. All right, so this is by Brown. Okay, and then structuring your abstract. Again, just a quick summary. As I said already, the abstract helps to sell your article, and sometimes this selling is really quite literal, because if I'm going to read your paper, you need to convince me. If I'm going to buy your article, you're selling it through your abstract. If I'm convinced by your abstract, I will then buy your article. Therefore, you're selling your article through your abstract. So are you a good salesperson or not? Okay. And remember, editors are busy. So when they look at your submission, remember I said, when you submit, especially when you submit online, they ask you to submit your abstract, the actual manuscript, and all other supplemental materials if there are. So often editors would immediately zoom in on the abstract that you've submitted, and then based on the abstract, they'll be saying, this is not in line with the focus of our journal. This is not, it's not clear what methodologies are used here and how the study was followed through. So editors receive hundreds and hundreds of submissions every week, every day. So they're very busy. So make sure that your abstract does not get lost in the cracks of this busyness. Make sure that your abstract, when the editor sits with your abstract and reads your abstract, they want to read your paper, right? It's their first contact with their paper. And sometimes, as I've just said, they make a decision just based on that abstract, right? That, no, this is not for us. Sorry, please consider sending it somewhere else. Your paper is not in line with what our journal is about. So then you get desk rejected. That's what we call desk rejection. All right. And I've already spoken about the readers and online. And then always ensure that you are clear, honest, concise, and have covered all the major points. Are all the major points covered? And do I know what the findings of your studies were? Do I know how you went about conducting your study, the methods that you used? Are all of those things there and clear in the abstract that you've provided? So before you start writing, consider having an outline, right? Have an outline of the work that you're going to, the ideas that you want to put together. This helps you in terms of the flow of your argument, but also it gives you an idea in terms of what's going to go, right? What falls where, what goes where. It assists you with that. So before you start writing the actual paragraphs, the content, the body, you may start thinking about what is it that this article is about, right? So the structure of the article, how is it going to be structured? Is it going to be like the formal introduction, literature, methodology, data collection, analysis? Is it going to be that, or am I going to do it differently? So how is it going to be structured? Again, it's going to be determined, or you might do it with the journal that you might have identified in mind. So some journals do not necessarily follow that strict step of looking at the introduction, the background, and the literature and so forth. So some would just say you have an introduction where you speak and you introduce your reader to what the issue is, what the challenge is, and how you're going to go about doing that, and giving an overview of what this paper is going to be about. And then instead of literature review, you have interesting topics where you discuss particular aspects of the work that you focused on. And then you go on to say, this is how you did your study. So not necessarily following the strict headlines that the conventional, yes, that's the word that has been escaping me, the conventional way in which we often do research. So what structure are you going to use? And then the flow, of course, with the structure that you have, you also be able to then see the flow. So if I structure it this way, how are my arguments, or how is my narrative going to flow? Right. So if you've got that outline already, you have an idea, a picture of the story that you want to tell. And of course, it has to be logical. You don't start with the discussion, or you don't start with the analysis of data before you've told us how you went about doing this work. Sometimes they can be combined in a way that then has that narrative flow in them. Again, it's going to be determined by how you choose to structure your work. All right. And then meaningful, interesting titles. You know, sometimes I often say to students, when you're writing your master's or your PhD, sometimes the titles or the headings that you use actually come from the data itself, right? So be creative and look at what is there in the data. And sometimes, especially if maybe you were doing interviews and engaging with people, there are some phrases and things that people would say that would actually make sense in a heading speaking about that particular phenomenon, right? So have your titles being meaningful, have your titles be interesting. And that way also then people would really engage and enjoy reading your work. All right. And then structuring your paper. What is the purpose of the paper? Why are you writing this article, right? So the same way, if you're thinking about your thesis or your dissertation, why are you doing this work? Why should we care? Why are you asking these questions? What's the purpose, right? So the purpose statement is, what is the significance, the what, the why, the who, right? What is the significance of the paper? What is it that you are measuring? What is it that you are exploring? What is it that you want us to think about? What is it that you're questioning? And why is this important and original? Is it because this question has not been asked before? Is it because this question has not been asked in this particular way before? Why is it important for us to think about this issue? Why is it important for us to care about how COVID has affected learners at schools, right? So why is it important for us to think about that? Why and why and how is this work original, right? So these are the things that you start your work with, your paper with, right? Who will be interested? Thinking about that. Who is the intended audience? Who is this work for? And then what are the implications and further research questions that you would want the reader to think about? So this as we explore, as we engage, as we think about this issue, as we measure, we may get to understand how we need to rethink certain things, how we need to question and come up with ways in which we can respond to this particular phenomena. Why is this important for us, right? So the purpose statement should be central to your article's composition, right? It will help you to develop the structure and provide a focus. So what is it that you explored? How did you explore it? And then you go on to explain and go to the steps of what is it that you explored, and then the processes that you followed and how you did the exploring, if you will, right? Why was it important? Who did you engage? Who did you involve? How did you do it? How did you analyze? What next? So with the purpose statement, then you already have a roadmap, if you will, of how the rest of the article is going to follow. And of course, we've spoken before about the thesis statement, and the thesis statement is the statement of purpose, right? That does not merely state coverage, but it also sets out an argument. So your thesis statement, if you think about it, it's the claim that you're making. The thesis statement is the argument, the main argument that you as a researcher, as a scholar, are putting forward. So it's very important, right? A thesis statement is unique from a purpose statement, because I wanted us to just look at them together, in that it makes a prediction of the study, right? Whereas a purpose statement, on the other hand, just provides readers with your goals, right? My aim here is to explore this and that. I explored this. So my goal was to measure, right? And look at the relationship between unemployment and poverty, right? So that's what I was interested in, and this is how I went about doing that. So there's the purpose, that's the purpose of what I'm interested in, what I was interested in. My goal was to get that understanding. My goal was to see whether there's a correlation between poverty and unemployment, all right? So you don't make any assertions of what the study may find or conclude when you do a purpose statement. Whereas with the thesis statement, you're making an argument and then you move on to then try and prove this argument that you've made for us. So you go on and say, I'm going to do this and that and that and that to show you that this argument that I'm making is worth making, but also such an argument can assist us to be able to get an understanding of something or to get an answer to a particular issue. And then at the end, you can say, therefore, my argument stands, or therefore, you know, it changes. So the thesis statement then at the end can change depending on what it is that you found, because you come up with an argument, sets of hypotheses, and then at the end you say, okay, no, actually, maybe not. But this is instead how we can think about it, and not the way that I thought perhaps we should think about it. Okay, because remember, you're coming with a question, you're coming with a hypothesis, and you go on to test that, you go on to follow steps to respond to the question that you have. And you do that the same in the article. That's throughout those 6,000 words that you have. That's what you're doing there, right? And the purpose statement, and understandably so, it belongs to the start of the article. So you start with an argument and say, this is what the issue is. It's central to the article's composition, right? So you're making that statement or that claim at the beginning of the article, you know, as part of the first part of your article. And then you go on to then engage and speak about what it is that you did, what happened, what the literature says, and then say, based on this, this is what I then conclude. Right, all the points that come should be related to the development. Sorry, it will help you to develop the article structure. That's the purpose statement, and all the subsequent points should be related to the development of this purpose statement. Whereas on the other hand, again, when creating your own purpose statement, there are a number of things that you have to keep in mind. Define your study as quantitative or qualitative. In this study, I'm exploring and following a qualitative study. This is what I did. I was interested in this. Your intent here is to explore, is to compare, is to measure something. That's what you're doing. And define how the research will take place, or define how the research has taken place. So I explored, I did this, and this is what I did. And then after the methods that I've used after the data, this is what I then found, right? Discuss who or what will be researched or was researched, because you're reporting on something that's already been done, and how it was done and where it was done. Okay, and here's just a quick example of a purpose statement. The present article, or in this article, I describe a qualitative study of the career development of 18 prominent, highly achieving African-American Black and white women in the US across 8 occupational fields. Our aim in the study was to explore critical influences on the career development of these women, particularly those related to their attainment of professional success. So we then did this And then we went about doing this. We engaged with these women. We asked them questions. We did focus groups. And in these focus groups, these were the things that we did. This is what we engaged with. And what came out was that this and that and the other, right? So you start with this and then you build on that to then explain to a reader what is it that you did. So you say this and then you say literature shows, for example, right? So if you're using that conventional style. So after this, you're going to then say, no, a lot of studies have shown this, or literature shows this and that and the other. And so in my study or in our study, this is what we did and this is how we did it. And then this is what we found. Right. So this article then makes this kind of contribution in terms of thinking about career development of highly achieving women. All right. Okay, and then quickly, then the thesis statement, moving towards finishing. Sometimes we wish to write a paper, right, an article which develops a particular thesis. And in this case, your statement of purpose will be more of a thesis statement. So not just the purpose, but you're going to provide a statement, which is your argument, right? And again, here it should be precise. So don't provide a whole page and say that's your thesis statement. The easier, the more concise your thesis statement is, the better for you, right? It should be kept in mind that all points during the writing of the article, just like the purpose statement, should be linked to this thesis statement or this argument that you've made at the beginning. And then your job is to then say, in the rest of this article, I'm going to show how this is the case. I'm going to highlight and indicate why we need to do things in this particular way. So you're using the article to then build on that argument and to show how that argument can then be proven. Okay. Okay, and here's a quick example of a thesis statement. Heavily taxing and increasing the price of cigarettes is essentially a tax on the poorest in our society. And it does not deter them from purchasing, right? People continue to buy cigarettes even though cigarettes are expensive. So what you do instead is that you're making people spend too much money on cigarettes, because making cigarettes expensive does not make people stop smoking, right? So what you're saying is that now people take additional money that they could be using for something else, to buy food, to buy cigarette. That's what you're doing when you heavily tax. So that's what you're saying. So you then therefore say, instead, the government should target those economically disenfranchised with early education about the dangers of smoking. So this is the argument that you're making, right? Hence I put there, instead I argue that the government should target. And then in the rest of this paper, in this article, you're then going to show us why education about the dangers of smoking is actually a better option than just taxing people with the hope that they will stop smoking because all their money will go towards that. So your paper will then focus on showing us why education about the dangers of smoking is actually a good method or a good way to go for us to ensure that not a lot of people in our society smoke, because they'll have the understanding of the dangers of smoking, right? So it's a statement that you've made that this is what's happening, and I think that's problematic. And because I think that's problematic, this is what I'm suggesting. And then I'm going to labor in this article to then show you why it's important for us to take this step or to take this direction. Okay. Most of the content of the article itself we will focus on tomorrow, but I thought I'll just give just a brief overview of how you structure the actual paper now, the body of your article. So obviously one of the very first important things is the introduction and the writing of the introduction. Why is the introduction important? Because it provides context, as we know, and it set out the paper's main aims, right? Why is this topic important? How how is it going to contribute to the body of knowledge? Us doing this work, us paying attention to this will assist in these ways. And then a bit of background in terms of what's already been done, a bit of background on the research, and then the structure, what the structure of the paper will be. So often in the introduction, you will then, your last paragraph or the last sentences of your of the last paragraph of your introduction will then say, in the rest of this paper or in the rest of this article, right? Or in this article, I'm going to focus on the following. I will do this, followed by that, and then I will conclude by doing 1, 2, 3. So in some ways, you provide a brief structure of what the reader can expect in the rest of the paper, in the introduction. Okay. And how long should it be? It should be long enough to develop your purpose statement, right? And then to set out the background of the topic. So it could be 500 to 700 words. It should not be longer than 2 pages at the most. What's important is that it should not overwhelm the reader or be out of proportion to the rest of the paper. So your introduction cannot be 4 pages. You need to be straight to the point. This is what a brief background. This is why it's important to do this. Then you go and then you bring in a bit of literature or research that's been done, and then saying this is how you're coming in. And then in the rest of your paper, you're going to then outline this and that and the other, and then up to the end. All right. When should it be written? I suggest that it's probably wise to write the introduction first because of the purpose statement that you have, which is going to direct you and assist you in how you're going to approach the paper. So the purpose statement or your thesis statement. But obviously, you're going to go back to your introduction. You always revisit your introduction so that there is a flow in the narrative that you're writing. Okay. And when should the introduction be written? As I've said, there's usually lack of consensus, right, when it comes to whether to write it first or whether to write it last. There's differences in terms of what people think is best. So there's a school of thought which says it should be written last, along with the conclusion, right? But because of the importance of the purpose statement, and the purpose statement should be the kernel, right, of the work, and should be written first, it therefore makes sense, therefore, then that the introduction should then lead what you're going to do. It's useful because it assists in setting out the context of your paper. The aim, what is the aim of what you intended to do or what you did, right? So based on that, then I suggest, and I think many of other colleagues would suggest, that you consider writing the introduction first, because it really introduces and puts forward a picture of what one can expect. All right, and as I said, it's something that you can revisit always later as well. And with that, once again, I shall pause here, the end of our session 2, and then move over to our Q&A. Okay. All right. More. Okay. I saw a question that just went, but there's a question on whether the slides are going to be shared. Yes, the slides are definitely going to be shared. Colleagues, the questions are coming and going. I'm not sure what's going on. There were quite a few questions now, they just disappeared. Biruk, is there any word limit for each manuscript section like the abstract? No, there isn't. And I think just based on what I've just said about the introduction, it's just important that each and every section provides the reader just enough questions for I mean, to provide the reader enough information for them to get an understanding of what your work is about. I've indicated, for example, that it's often advised that you have your introduction being between 500 and 700 words, and you should try as much as possible to not have your introduction not being longer than 2 pages. Right. And again, when it comes to the length of your manuscript and the different sections, remember, it's also going to be determined by the journal that you're choosing also, right? So if you have chosen a journal that says you have 8,000 word limit, you have 10,000 word limit, and another journal says you've got 4,000 word limit. So that is going to again, inform you, right, in terms of how long the sections are going to be. As I said, the important parts of your work is actually the body of your work. And what is the body of your work? The body of your work is where you actually discuss and speak about the research itself. What is it that you did? How did you go about doing it? What is it that you found? And how are you making meaning of what you found? And then what is it that you are then recommending? What are some of the conclusions and strategies and things that you want the reader to take with? So that the body of your work is very important, because that is where the actual research is, and that's where the bulk of the words that you're going to use should be. The introduction is there, you provide that introduction. The literature, like I said, it's there, but you need to just be very economical in terms of how you bring in the literature. So you need to ask yourself, is it really important for me to draw from Sekgalo to make this point here, or is it not? And sometimes one of the things that you can learn is you can read 10 articles, right? You can read 10 articles that are talking on a particular issue, and they may not necessarily come up with the same conclusion or same argument, but they're focusing on a particular issue. So you're saying the issue of unemployment and poverty has been covered by a lot of studies in the past few years, right? So see Sekgalo 2020, see Mokoena 2019, see Smith 2017, and so and so and so. So in that way, you're actually saving space, right? So you're not going to say Smith 2017 speaks about unemployment and poverty, and this is what Smith indicates. Smith shows that this is the issue, and they went about doing this work and what. That's already a paragraph. You talking about Smith. And then you say, on the other hand, or along what Smith was saying, Mokoena also engages this issue of employment and unemployment and poverty by highlighting what, and this and that. By the time you finish with Mokoena, there's already a page about these two authors and what they said about unemployment and poverty, right? While what you could have just said is that there has been a body of knowledge and scholars who've engaged on this issue of unemployment and poverty. For example, so and 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 so. So as the reader, if I'm interested in finding out more about what these scholars have said and what they've done, you've got references, you've given me the sources, I can go and read. So you don't have to summarize the things that they've said in your article. With your thesis, you've got space. You can do that. Your literature review can be 10 pages, right? So you have that space, but also because we want to get an understanding that you know how to engage with scholarly work. So when you're writing an article, that's not an opportunity for you to show me that you are able to engage with scholarly work. When you're writing an article, you're saying that I understand this work, this is what I've done, and here I'm going to be speaking about my work. So we're not expecting you to now be providing us a lot of literature where you're putting people in conversation with each other and giving us summaries of what people have done. We want to hear your voice. And that is why you only have only a limited space in terms of word limits. So that's why you only have that. So it's very, very important, right? So give that background, give a little bit of literature. There'll be a bit of literature also in the body. So focus on the body of the work. So that's where the bulk would be. So I would say of the 5,000 words that you have for your paper, 3,000 words should be dedicated to that, where we really hear what it is that you're bringing into the conversation. So a bulk of the work should be on that, right? And then the rest of it would be divided between the abstract, the introduction, your conclusion. But then the rest of it should really be with you interrogating and explaining to us and showing us what is it that you've done and what it is that you are bringing onto the table and what it is that you're contributing to the body of knowledge. What is it that you're contributing into that field that you are in? Okay, so that then people can go and look at your work and refer to your work and reference your work. Okay. All right. How long should the purpose statement and the thesis statement be? It should be, as you saw what I showed in the presentation now. You should strive for that. So it should not be more than a paragraph. It should not be more than just a few lines where you're just straight to the point explaining what it is that your paper. So think about it like you're making an argument. So imagine making an argument in a whole page or an argument in 2 pages. Then it's not clear what your argument is. So if you're saying, I'm interested in this particular issue, and say, yeah, you're interested in that, but how are you coming in? What is your claim? So what is it that you're arguing? You need to be able to say, this is what my argument is. So literally just a few lines, at the most a paragraph, NEMPO. And the same also with the purpose statement, that in this work, this is what I did, this is how I did it, and this is the reason why I was interested in. Because remember, the statement is just there to say to the reader, this is what I'm interested in, this is how I'm approaching this work. And then in the body of the work, you're then going to actually engage with that actual work that you spoke about in your purpose statement, or you're going to now showing us and justifying that argument that you made in your thesis statement. Okay, I hope that's clear, Mpo. Morgak, I have come across scholars writing on similar variables, but measured them differently. And arrived at different conclusions. Can this be regarded as a gap in my review? It depends on how you're coming into that conversations, right? So you're saying that they are writing on similar variables, right? But then they look at these variables and measure them differently, right? So already it means their approach is different. They're coming into that conversation from different angles, and depending on how they're doing the work, that can also contribute to what it is that they find, right? So you can definitely join that conversation and indicate that the variables were similar that they looked at. However, they came up with different conclusions, depending on where they did this work, on how they measured it as well, what the focus was in the process that they used, that can contribute to what they will find at the end, right? So the different conclusion that they will come with is because the focus or the tools they use were different. So yes, you can say that that is a gap, right? Or you can say there seems to be, how can I put it? Okay. This author looked at this issue and this is what they found, and this author looked at this issue and this is what they found. So I'm coming into this conversation because I have questions around how is it that they looked at this same thing, but then they came up with different conclusions, right? But remember, they measured differently. So it's in the measuring also that can determine the tools that you use, the approach that you take, that can also determine how you're going to get to the end point, right? So you can decide whether you see that as a gap, but then you need to justify, why are you saying it's a gap? Are you saying it's a gap because the variables were similar, but somehow they managed to find different conclusions? And therefore, there's something to be looked at there. And you're coming in to say, okay, what if I do something similar? What kind of conclusion will I find? And then you can do that. And then based on the conclusion, you can then say, oh, okay, actually this one was right, or this one was right. Or you can come in and use both at the same time, right? So how did that other one measure? And how did that other one measure? Is it possible to then bring both to measure, to do the work, look at the variables and then measure using both, and then see what it is that you find? Is it something that's possible for you to do? So yes, no, definitely. You can come into that conversation and then come up with your own way of doing it. And saying, by doing it this way, I actually answer both. So I've done something different now. It's a gap because, you know, it leaves us with questions, because now we wonder, which one should we follow, which one should we use? And this is how we build on scholarship. So you can definitely do that and say you've read the literature, and after reading the literature, you see this as something that is a gap, or that is a question that needs to be answered because of how other scholars have approached this issue. Okay. All right, Morgag, I hope that answers you. You're welcome, Baruch. Okay. Good evening, Prof. I understand that for a master's degree or a doctoral degree, you need to publish one paper for master's and 2 papers for doctorate. Who pays for the publication of these journals? Can a master's student graduate without having published a paper? I understand that it takes time to publish a paper. You are correct. We actually had this conversation yesterday as well. Yes, according to the M&D procedures, the manual that you have, and the new regulations at the university, for all the students who registered for the first time from 2020 onwards up to now, it is a requirement that for you as a master's or doctoral student, you have to publish a paper. But according to the procedures, you will not be penalized, or your graduation or your qualification would not be held back if the paper is not published. What is required is that you work on a manuscript, and this is part of the reason why we're having this publication session, so that we can assist you as you think about the articles that you are going to be writing as a prerequisite for you to graduate and get your qualification. But what the university requires is that you submit a manuscript. Okay, so the paper does not necessarily have to be published for you to graduate. You need to submit it. Yesterday, we had a conversation where one of the students indicated that in their college, there was a workshop and they were informed that they have to have the paper published before they can graduate. And obviously, a number of students are panicking as a result. But what I would like to say to all of you is that please follow what the M&D procedures are saying. The M&D procedures are there to guide you as students, to know what's expected of you as the student from when you start your registration in your first year until you complete your studies. So use that as a guide and use that as your contract with the university. Unfortunately, we also have different understandings in terms of the expectations and what's required, but the M&D procedures are very, very clear. They are very clear that you need to submit a manuscript, right, before your results can be released. You need to have submitted. Nowhere does it say you have to have published. There's a difference between submitting a manuscript and providing proof that you've submitted, and having a manuscript published. At the moment, you are busy focusing on your research as a master's and doctoral student. You may not necessarily be focusing on writing articles, which takes a lot of time. But also, if you're going to write an article focusing on the research that you're doing, obviously you need to get to a point where you have your results before you can have something to say pertaining to the research that you're doing. All right, so yeah, my advice to you is please make sure that you always use your M&D procedures as a guide. If it means sitting down with your supervisor to discuss the M&D procedures, I encourage you to do that. But make sure that you know what's in there, you understand what's in there. If there's anything that you don't understand, we're going to have sessions later in the year where we speak just generally about any questions that you might have pertaining to any issue linked to your studies. So we'll still have general conversations, so to speak, on that. But yeah, Anonymous, yes, you have to write an article. It's required, 1 for master's, 2 for PhD. However, it's submission and not publication, because as we know, sometimes getting a paper published might take a year. If you're lucky, it might take 6 years, sometimes even, 6 months, sorry, 6 months, but sometimes longer. So if you think about it in terms of the implications around the delay when it comes to graduation, if you're waiting for your paper or papers to be published, it might mean that you'll be done with your thesis, but then you have to wait for a year before you can graduate because you're waiting for a paper to be published. So I would like to ease your nerves on that and know that you're not required to publish, but to submit a paper to a journal as it's stated in your M&D procedures. And then who pays for the publication for the journals? The university does. When you are publishing using UNISA's name as a UNISA student, and the particular journal that you've chosen requires page fees, you have to tell your supervisor, and this is, again, remember, when you're going to be publishing, it's expected that you would have had a conversation with your supervisor, you would have worked together with your supervisor, and possibly co-authoring with your supervisor. So the university pays for the publication. You don't have to worry about that. It pays up to a maximum of 16,000 Rand though. So this helps again when it comes to the word limit and number of pages that you write for your article. So if you're going to write 30 pages, for example, that might exceed the 16,000 that the university pays, depending on how much the journal charges per page. And some journals, depending where they are based, they might be charging in dollars or in euros. So take that in mind as well. The university pays a maximum of 16,000 Rand. And then beyond that, you can, if maybe it happens that your page fees are 17 or 19,000 Rand, communicate with your supervisor. With your supervisor, then your home department where you are registered, they might assist you with the departmental funds to pay the difference, because the department also gains when you publish or when the supervisor publishes. So yeah, the university pays, number 1. And second, yes, you are expected to work on manuscripts for your master's and your doctorate to submit to a journal, but these have to be submitted and not necessarily published. If they're published, wonderful, that's great, but it's not a requirement. Okay. Okay, I've come across scholars. Oh, okay. Okay, I've responded to that. That was Morgag's question around scholars who've written on the same thing and measured differently and found different conclusions, and whether he can join that or she can join that conversation to engage with what the scholars have written about. Okay. Hi, Louise. Although the thought of Writing a paper leaves me without breath. Feels like walking without clothes in the street to be judged. It feels less scary now. You're very concise and provide clear direction. Okay, Louise, I'm very glad that the nerves have been eased a little bit. It's always a journey, and it's different journals all the time, and the feedback, you can never know what feedback is going to come. And please note that even for us as lecturers, as supervisors, as professors, when we submit articles to journals, there's always that worry that it might get rejected, and sometimes they do get rejected. You may submit a paper to a journal, and then it comes back and it's rejected. Hence, I said earlier that sometimes you need to understand that the process can be very subjective, because the reviewers are our peers, they are fellow scholars, they might see things differently. But it's an opportunity to have a conversation. And oftentimes, it's usually not a clear out rejection. It might be major revisions that are required. So you get the opportunity to work on your paper. But also, it's always a learning curve. If it comes back and is rejected, sometimes they provide reasons why it's rejected. And it gives you the opportunity to revise and work on the work that you have produced and submitted. And please take comfort in knowing that it's always a process, and take comfort in knowing that even as when we submit, sometimes it comes back and it's rejected. But always it's how you receive that feedback and how you work on the paper, and also the reasons why the work gets rejected. Sometimes it could just be because it's not a good fit for that journal, and they said, no, we can't consider your work, consider sending it somewhere else, and it might get rejected at this journal. And then you may find that if you submit it somewhere else, it gets accepted. So you never know. You never know. It's always a process, always a process. So please do not be too fearful about the process and what's expected. I know it can be very daunting. It can be, but it really is doable. And I'm glad, Louisa, that you found the explanation and the session useful in assisting to alleviate some of these nerves and concerns that you have. Does UNISA subscribe to journals for free access? How can we access it? Do we use our UNISA student ID and password, or how? Biruk, yes. UNISA subscribes to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of journals. So UNISA pays the subscription, and then you as the student do get free access. So how can you access it? Yes, you use your login details. So the easiest way to access is through the library. So if you go to the library online with your ID and your password, you should then, by just logging in, and it recognizes you as a UNISA student, you immediately have access to all these journals. So please play around and see. And if you experience any challenges, please contact your departmental or subject librarian. As we know, all the departments, all the disciplines, there is a librarian, someone at the library who is specifically assigned to your specific discipline. I hope you know who those people are for your different disciplines. If you do not know who the person for your discipline is, please make sure that you find out who they are. Check with your supervisor. Check with your department and find out who your discipline librarian is. That person should be your friend. Okay, make sure that you, when you have issues, for example, even when you choose journals, if you want to make sure that the journal that you have chosen or that you're considering is not a predatory journal, the subject librarian can help you with that. If maybe you want access to a particular journal and you're struggling, your subject librarian can assist you with that. So yeah, but the simple answer is that you do just use your student ID and your password online to get access to to all these journals for free online. Okay, so all the best with that. Yes, Jerry. Does the word length include the title and the references? Yes, yes. They are included there. Hence my comment earlier about references, that it has to be your voice. It has to be what you have to share. So make sure that you are very economical with words and decide on what it is that you want to center. Sometimes you will see with the reviewers' feedback where they'll say they would like you to elaborate more on a particular issue, or it's not clear how you went about doing this, or you've said something, but you did not go on to elaborate and explain how you did it, or to justify the claim that you're making, for example. So some of the feedback from the reviewers will show you where there are challenges. And sometimes when you get that feedback, depending on what the reviewers are asking, if maybe your paper was 6,000 words on the dot and the word limit is 6,000, and then the reviewer is asking you to elaborate on something, you can negotiate with the editor. Sometimes they agree and sometimes not, but you can negotiate with the editor and say, okay, the reviewers have asked that I elaborate a little bit on this, but if I do that, it's going to go beyond the word limit. May I please have 500 more words so that I can be able to do that? May I please have 300 more words? So sometimes some journals or some editors can be a bit generous, and then they can allow you that space. So make sure when you draw from other scholars, when you reference other people, that you do not over-reference, if there's such a thing. But try and as much as possible, make sure that your references are not too long and that they're going to take up a lot of space and words that you could have used instead to engage with your reader. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, I see a similar question from Baruch as well. Does the word limit include the reference lead in the abstract? Okay, I see. Yeah, people are concerned about that, and the answer is yes. Yes, they are included. So already you know what the word limit is for the abstract. So if the abstract is 250, if it's 200, already that's 6,000 words. If the journal is 6,000 maximum, so that's 6,000 words. Minus the 250 or 200, so already then you have 5,800 if you exclude the abstract, so it is included. Okay, going down, I don't see other questions. Let's see. Okay. Paul, if you want to provide the rationale, remember I said when you're writing an abstract, depending on the structure of it, if maybe using the conventional style of the introduction, the background, and the literature review and the methodology and all of that, depending on the structure of it, that will determine how everything is laid out, right? So your question is that we've now clarified the difference between the purpose statement and the thesis statement. Where does the rationale fit in when one writes a paper? That's also going to be included in your introduction. If you want to then provide the rationale for why you conducted this study, the rationale for why it was important for us to pay attention to this particular issue, that would be included as part of the background, the part of the introduction. So it would be at the beginning of your article. So that first page or the first 2 pages, that would also then include the rationale. Okay, so you're saying that the purpose is this, I'm interested in this, I want to explore or have explored, and the aim was to do this, and this is what we did, right? And if, on the other hand, you're using you're coming in or with an argument, which is then your thesis statement, you're putting forward the argument, and then you provide the rationale saying this is important because if we do it, it will assist us to understand this. If we pay attention to the importance of educating people about the dangers of smoking, then we will get to understand and see that maybe taxing, highly taxing people is not the answer, but then more education starting early might actually make sure that later on we don't have this problem of smoking, right? So why is this important? It's important because if we do this, this is what will happen. So if we're thinking about the rationale of the work that you're doing, that would fit in together with the introduction of your work, and then moving from there and actually speaking about the work itself. Okay. All right, Mpho, I hope that answers your question. Okay. I don't see any other questions. And in the absence of questions, there's still about 7 minutes to go, but I'm sure we can take that 7 minutes to enjoy the rest of our evening. Thank you so much. Thank you for attending this session. Thank you for your questions. And please remember, tomorrow we are going to be having the third and last session on writing for publication. So the journey will continue, and tomorrow we are going to then be looking at the heart, what I call the heart, but also the actual body of the article on how one goes about doing that, and other issues around what Louise was talking about in terms of being worried about writing an article because of the possibility of rejection. So we'll speak a little bit also on how can we respond to or deal with rejection, but also speak to why papers get rejected as well. Because if we know and understand why papers get rejected, then maybe in our own papers, in our own articles, we can try and prepare as much as possible in a way that would minimize the possibility of our work being rejected. Okay, and with that, I would like to thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we shall connect again tomorrow night. Goodbye, everyone.